Well, the United Nations primary principle, why it was established, was so that nations could peacefully negotiate their problems and come through it, in a collective fashion. And that's where it's not delivering. It's not delivering because when it comes to UN General Assembly, we keep on hearing in the case of Kashmir that it is done under Chapter 6, which is under Pacific Settlement of Disputes. Therefore, the United Nations is toothless. But at the same time, if it is seen from an international humanitarian crisis, the same United Nations General Assembly can also have the powers shifted of the UN Security Council shifted to the UN General Assembly under Uniting for Peace resolution, because the UN Security Council, which is its prime job, to see if there's something which is leading towards instability and is causing insecurity and causing not living up to the objectives of peace and stability in the region, they're supposed to act on it. That's why the
and that's what they're
not doing it. And if they're not doing it, then the powers need to be shifted. But for that, you will have to lobby. For that, you will have to move away in terms of actual restructuring of the United Nations, in which the people, the less powered, actually have some mechanisms through which the relationships and these things are done in an equitable fashion.
So it's a biased organization. Would it be justified to say that of course, as you mentioned,
it was not intended to be, but the way it has functioned, it has not been equal and it has not been just. Some departments have gone ahead where the interest of the P5, or for that matter even the United States, relied. Those departments of the United Nations have been supported, strengthened, UN Security Council being the top of the list, while others haven't received the same attention they should have. And perhaps the problem is also from the developing countries.
Right. Let's go to Ambassador Akram. Ambassador Akram, now the discussion that we're having here, Dr. Sultan believes that the United Nations has not been able to live up to what it was, live up to its original conception. Why it was conceived, it hasn't been able to live up to its the reason for its conception. What do you feel?
There is a great deal of disappointment that the United Nations has not been able to serve as an impartial organization which can serve the interests of peace and security and provide equity and justice to the world. But I think this was the original vision, the dream, was also perhaps somewhat unrealistic, because the United Nations is a reflection of the combined membership, the sovereign states which are its members, and it is a place, first and foremost, a place of power politics. It reflects power politics. Maria was speaking about the shift of power to the Security Council from the General Assembly. This is a reality which has happened over the years, and even in the Security Council, at one stage, the Security Council was totally dominated in the 90s by the United States. Since the Iraq War, it has become a more oligarchic mechanism, but still it is a place where the great powers have great say and the smaller countries have less say, and this is a reality which is reflected in the world. The only way it can be redressed is if the smaller countries, the medium powers, are able to combine and act together to cooperate in forums such as the Group of 77, the non-aligned countries group, the Islamic countries. If they are able to cooperate effectively, they can reassert their interests. It is a question whether they have the will to promote such cooperation and to confront, if necessary, the great powers in asserting their rights in the United Nations.
On that note, we'll take a short break. We'll be right back. The discussion is not going anywhere. Do join us right after.
Not being responsive, but they're overstepping.
Welcome back. You're watching The Platform, and we are talking about the role of the United Nations in today's world and its relevance, its effectiveness, of course. Mr. Quaterman, now, when according to this Heritage Foundation, it's a Washington-based think tank, of course, they have the right-wing leaning, but they say that the United States is contributing 22% of the UN regular budget and more than 27% of the peacekeeping budget, and this year, last year alone, the amount was $7.7 billion. Now, when the United States is contributing so much, how realistic is it for people to expect that the United States would not expect in return the kind of leverage that it enjoys over the United Nations?
That's a very good question. It's human nature, I suppose, that when an entity provides a certain amount of funding, it might expect at least a degree of cooperation. But that's not what this multilateral project is about. The the United States doesn't contribute those percentages, 22% of the regular budget, 20%, 27% of peacekeeping, out of its own sense of goodwill. But rather, the member states in their wisdom have determined that contributions to the United Nations should track the size of a particular country's global, the percentage of the global economy. So these are amounts that the United States, in signing on to the UN Charter, is obligated to contribute. Smaller countries contribute their smaller percentage. And so there isn't a quid pro quo. We will write a larger check in order to get more influence, but rather that's what the United States is obligated to contribute to the United Nations.
Now, if we look at what the problem of the world is with the United States, at the top, at least in the Muslim world, is the Israel-Palestine issue. And today we have this advancing U.S. interests at the United Nations White House. The White House put out these remarks, and it says standing up for Israel at the UN. Now, we all know that Palestine will submit the UN membership letter. We know that Israel will oppose it. The United States will stand by Israel. Why, when the United States also is committed to a two-state solution, what's the problem with this one?
It's an interesting question. It's a very interesting question because the United States has also been vigorous in its support of self-determination in other circumstances too. I think that the United States has put itself in the position over the years of being a very, very close ally of Israel, and it has done so at the risk of isolation in the United Nations. Every year, I would say there are about a half dozen or so resolutions in the General Assembly on various aspects of the Palestinian issue or Palestinian-Israeli issues. And the U.S. finds itself in tiny minorities where 116, 120, 130 member states will vote in favor of something. For example, pressing Israel to compensate Lebanon for oil slicks caused by Israeli military actions on Lebanese beaches. And the United States finds itself with 8 or 9 or 7 other countries opposing. This is one of those ongoing quirks of international relations that has started. It's got a lot to do with domestic politics in the United States. It had a lot to do with Cold War politics in the Middle East as well, and it's continued. And it looks as though the United States will again put itself in the very uncomfortable situation of being very isolated in the United Nations, even from some of its closest allies, the U.S. and France, on this issue.
Let me go to New York and ask Ambassador Akram a question on the same subject. Ambassador Akram, we all know that Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas will submit UN membership letter. Israel will oppose it. If we have to ask you the merits of the presentation of this letter and Israel's opposition, what are the merits? Why it is legitimate for Palestine to present this letter, or why is it legitimate for Israel to oppose it?
Well, I think that the move that is being made by Mr. Mahmoud Abbas is a move of a last resort, a desperate move, because they have found no other avenues to make progress towards a peaceful settlement of the Palestine issue to achieve the aspiration for statehood. What they are asking for is a huge compromise, a huge concession on what the traditional Arab and Palestinian position has been on the issue of the Palestine-Israeli conflict. So it's a desperate move. I believe that its success or failure will have political repercussions. It may have repercussions in the region as such, but it could have been avoided, but there was, I feel, a great intransigence on the part of the Israeli government, which has made this confrontation inevitable at the United Nations. But for me, I think the bigger question for Pakistanis is, while the Palestinians are defending their cause, why are we not similarly assertive on the rights of the Kashmiri people?
Fine. Let me ask this question from Mr. Quaterman, and then we'll give a chance to Mari to ask a question from Islamabad. Very briefly, what will be Israel's beef? What will be Israel's line of reasoning for opposing this?
Hard pressed to speak for Israel. I know that the U.S. is saying that, as they put it, the line, the road to peace lies through negotiations between the two parties, and not through New York. And that's one of their arguments, that this might have a negative effect on a peace process. I must admit, a very moribund peace process right now. I think the Israelis have been saying also that this could have a negative effect, and they have expressed concern that it might cause them further isolation and give a state of Palestine that could be a member of the International Criminal Court or other international bodies further opportunities to isolate or embarrass Israel. It's interesting, though, that today, or I think yesterday, Prime Minister Netanyahu offered to speak to President Mahmoud Abbas in New York. I mean, it's interesting that they live a half-an-hour drive away from each other, and that they have to come to New York for that offer to be issued. But I think that there has been a very hard line taken by this Israeli government, and I think Ambassador Akram is absolutely right that this is an act of frustration on the part of the Palestinians.
We'll try to get an Israeli perspective on this in our later programs, but right now we'll go across to Islamabad. And Maria, if you have a question, please go right ahead. Otherwise, I have a question from Ambassador Mahmood.
Kokab, I'd like to ask Ambassador Mahmood. Ambassador Akram was just talking about why Pakistan is not following in the footsteps of Palestine and mobilizing the international community as far as Kashmir is concerned. I'd like to ask you that, isn't the United States disabling the United Nations in playing a progressive role as far as the Kashmir issue is concerned? Because when something happens in India, and the Indians want the United States support. India is all ready to exercise its. The United States is all ready to exercise its clout on Pakistan. Yet, when it comes to the Kashmir issue, they very conveniently pull out and they say, this is a no-go zone for us.
See, as my friend Munir Akram has pointed out, that at the UN, it is the power of politics which is at play. Now, United States is trying, like other countries also, use United Nations to promote their own national interests. Now, at the present moment, according to the United States, its national interests are better served if it sides with India on Kashmir, or supports or shields, in fact, Indian atrocities.
Even if they're wrong.
Even if they're wrong. Right. So, one should see it in that context, and it is not the fault of the UN as such. It is how the member states are treating the United Nations. Of course, when Pakistan how it should promote or activate the Kashmir case, it depends upon the government of Pakistan, which, taking into account all the circumstances and other considerations, it will decide. I agree with him that in order to keep this issue alive, Pakistan should be making some diplomatic moves at the United Nations, like the one made by Palestine.